Hi everyone, this is Dr. Rebecca Harvey with Total Wellness Consultants, and I'm making this video today to help those who visit my website understand a little bit more about one of the things I implement in my practice with clients, which is mindfulness. So I wanted to talk today about the importance of how mindfulness supports your therapy efforts, specifically how mindfulness will help you better regulate your emotions and have a better quality of life. So mindfulness, which most of you are probably familiar with, is the idea of doing one thing at a time, moment to moment, or breath to breath. And something that anchors us into mindfulness is being very aware of the present sensations we're experiencing. So what we can see, what we can hear, feel, taste, touch, you get the idea. Now, mindfulness helps us get present and to practice returning to that single pointed focus again and again. And what we do when we do a mindfulness meditation practice is that we actually begin to cultivate noticing when our thoughts move through and interrupt that single pointed focus. And then that allows us to observe, move our focus back into the present moment. But additionally, what it allows us to do is to notice the patterns of thoughts that start to arise. Hopefully, we begin to notice them with acceptance of our observation and non-judgement about what we're seeing. In essence, we may see parts of ourselves or emotional experiences, etc., that we are not really that keen on, things we don't particularly like that much. But the reality is we're all made up of a spectrum of emotions and different character traits, which is really just the byproduct of our early environment. So an example of this would be anger. Now, anger is a human emotion. It's actually a useful human emotion, despite what you may have been led to believe. So we often try to stuff, kind of push down or push aside, ignore our anger because we think that there's something bad or wrong about having it. And the reality is that if we can instead get present with that anger, and we can do that by noticing the emotional experience or the physical manifestation of the emotional experience, we can begin to glean or decipher what important message our anger is delivering to us. So just like every other emotion on the human spectrum of emotions, anger is a healthy emotion. Now, what we do with it might not always be so healthy, and here's why. So our brain is divided up into a lot of different sections that perform independent functions. And hopefully, ideally, they also come together as a unified system to form a collective functioning whole. Now, we're going to pretend that this is your brain. And so this would be your spinal cord, and at the base of your brain, your primitive reptilian brain, named so because even reptiles have this. So here we find fight, flight, and freeze responses. Wrapped around that, we have your limbic system, hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, vaguely responsible for memory, visceral regulation, physiology in the body. And this one's important, the amygdala. This is emotional interpretation and emotional reactivity. Then wrapped around that, we have the frontal lobe. And here at the front, we have the medial prefrontal cortex, which is really important part for us to, let's say, eat our green beans before our ice cream, or not go to a big party the night before our midterm exams, or not punch someone in the face when they talk about your mama. So what happens, and by the way, I borrowed this hand diagram from Dan Siegel, who is phenomenal, so check him out, please. What happens is that when we have a big emotion, it's often preloaded from experiences from our past. So we have memories and physiological experiences of various emotional things that have occurred and how we interpreted situations. Now, the brain works in such a way that things that are in closer proximity to each other, they're closer together, they tend to work together more easily. What happens when this part gets fired up for a big emotion is that we may respond or react in a primitive way, that fight or flight kind of mode. So we're doing things that we may regret later, like we have an anger response and we respond by yelling at someone or saying hurtful things. So here's the deal. What happens for us when this gets triggered in a big way, somebody pushes that button, is, and perhaps you've heard the term someone flipped their lid, but it's as if this lid of the frontal lobe flips, and the neural connections that run between these two parts that help this one to rationalize and calm this one down, it's as if they've gone offline. Now, when that happens and we do this reactive behavior, we often then, when our lid comes back online, regret what's happened and we say like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? But the reality was you weren't thinking. You were just reacting because this frontal lobe was offline. So the therapist in therapy helps to act as an external frontal lobe. So I, as a psychologist, lift this lid up and say, let's talk about the feelings and emotions that are going on. And I might help you identify them in your body. And then we'll put this back on and we'll talk about logical, practical things you can do to implement strategies to help you perform and create new behavioral patterns. And we'll do this many times throughout a therapy session. By doing so, we're creating new neural pathways and we're strengthening the healthier neural pathways that already exist. Now, interestingly enough, mindfulness meditation has been research proven to exponentially expedite the process of creating the neural pathways and strengthening those that are serving us. In fact, meditation strengthens the medial prefrontal cortex, and we see that the gray matter actually begins to densify and increase. So this part of our brain grows. And the part that's responsible for this emotional reactivity begins to shrink. So you can put two and two together. This is a much healthier place for us to be responding from. And in this way, we begin to notice when our lid is starting to flip. So someone starts to talk about our mama and we say, whoa, 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 whoa. I'm starting to feel a certain kind of way. Let me pause and pull back and look at that. When I say look at that, what I mean is utilize those observational skills that we developed with mindfulness meditation or in therapy doing mindfulness behavior. When we can pause and observe, we tend to make healthier choices for ourselves and increase positive engagement in our life. Okay, so let me backtrack a little bit. Let's pretend that you're 3 years old. So you're 3 years old and you hit someone for taking your toy. There's that anger again. And let's say ideally you're getting sent to the corner for 3 minutes. Now, I'm not a child therapist, so if these interventions have changed, perhaps I'm archaic. But let's say for a 3-year-old, you're in timeout for 3 minutes. Your lid is flipped. You're probably crying. You're very upset because you've been scolded. And what this then requires is an adult brain to help regulate your brain. So after 3 minutes, your parent would bring you from the corner, your caregiver would bring you from the corner and explain to you what happened. We don't hit people in this family when we're angry. What we do is we get a grown-up and we tell them that someone took our toy. Do you understand? And you might be hyperventilating. Yes, I understand. Okay, so next time, are you going to get a grown-up? Yes, I will. Okay. And this lid starts to come back on. And then maybe we get a hug and our parent says, you're a good boy or a good girl, go play. And every time a parent performs this function for us, these neural pathways develop that help us learn how to better regulate our emotions. But unfortunately, many of us didn't get this kind of parenting. And it's not because we had horrible parents. It's because many of their lids were flipped. So they were emotionally responding at us rather than pulling back and observing how to best respond in that moment. So what we then learn as a child is that come hell or high water, we do not want to flip that lid. As a result, there are many things we do to try to avoid getting that lid flipped. So we might avoid relationship or avoid intimacy, not let someone really see who we are. We might lie about things that we think would upset someone else or try to control situations or people. In doing all of these things, we're really just trying to regulate emotions that we don't know how to better regulate. Conversely, a lot of us move towards self-soothing, which can sometimes become addictive behaviors. Things like sex, shopping, eating, alcohol, drugs, gambling. The list can really go on and on of the things we can do to try to get an inherent neurotransmitter kick or little internal high that leaves us feeling good so we don't have to feel bad. So here's where therapy can help. When you work with a skilled therapist, when you practice mindfulness techniques, you begin to develop these neural structures in a way that support you in better observing yourself and then better regulating your emotions. Mindfulness and thus therapy actually connect us to our body in a different way. Now, this is important because every emotion has a physical sensation. And if we can identify that sensation, as I mentioned earlier, sensations are actually something that anchor us into the present moment. And in this moment, we can then sort of hold that emotion lightly and be present with it rather than trying to push it down or stuff it to the side or ignore it, make it go away. And when we hold it in this way, it's just energy. Energy goes. So the interesting thing about this is that energy will go in 90 seconds. It sounds unbelievable, I know. But researcher Jill Bolt Taylor demonstrated that in 90 seconds, the physical sensation of an emotion moves through our body. So if we can get present with it and stop picking up the thought that leads to the emotion in the first place, we can manage that emotion and allow it to move on, which gives us amazing empowerment to better respond in our day-to-day living. Now, once we let go of that emotion, it's not realistic to expect that it's not going to nag us. So let's pretend, for example, that this is the annoying emotion, and I'm going to put it right here. So it's like there. It's like really in the space, right? Now, just because I've decided that I don't want to pay attention to this doesn't mean that it goes away. In fact, it's right here in my periphery. So I know exactly where to pick this up if I want to. So much like a younger sibling who would be annoying, trying to bother you and get your attention, if you were to turn and attend to them and say, go away, it's like you're keeping that energy again, just right here, moving and working with it. Whereas if you just let it be there and don't engage with it, your attention moves on to something else and you get some reprieve from whatever this intense emotionally provocative thing is. So the takeaway I want to leave you with today is that everyone has anxiety and depression. Everyone has emotions on the spectrum of emotions. But if you decide to develop a daily mindfulness practice, if you develop a mindfulness meditation practice, and or work with a psychologist to help you begin to implement these mindfulness skills, you can gain better control over your emotional regulation and create more empowerment in your life to overcome the obstacles you haven't quite yet been able to master on your own. I'm Dr. Rebecca Harvey with Total Wellness Consultants, and I hope to see you soon.